Hi, everyone. We're so glad you're joining us again to talk about our remote learning guidance. Now, moving from the beginning of the year, we've all started into our middle and end of the year guidance, and we're super excited to spend the next hour with you, sharing our thinking and hearing from our fabulous district partners who'll be with us. Most of you know already, but for those of you who don't, we are a mission-driven nonprofit. We care very deeply about developing readers, writers, and thinkers that also have the social and emotional skills that they need to really serve us in the future. So we're thrilled to share our thinking with you today and can't wait to learn alongside of you, both in the chat and in the Q&A, as Gina just shared. So we're going to start off a little bit with getting to know you. So Gina is going to launch a poll. And the first one's really around how you are providing instruction right now, like what's going on in your space. So if you'll take just a second to put your current mode of instruction there, we'll give everybody just another couple seconds to log their thinking. And then Gina, when you're ready, if you'll close it and share how we're all providing instruction. Let's take a peek.
Sure, I'm gonna let it go to 30 seconds.
Oh, got it. I was moving too fast.
And here we go.
You'll want to share those results, Gina. It's not showing up for us quite. There we go. Oh, wow. Take a look. Most of us are fully remote, 80% almost. That's amazing. Yep. And I know some of you started face-to-face and now moved to remote just as of Monday. So I know many of us are in lots of situations. Thank you for that. So we have one more poll. We'd love to know a little bit more about whether or not you have a Learning Portal account, because that is where the majority of our resources are found. So we'll give everybody a couple seconds to log. Do you have a Learning Portal account? And if you're thinking, I don't even know what the portal is, we're going to assume you don't have an account. So you can just click no on that one as well. Gina, let me know when 30 seconds is up and we'll kind of see where our friends are today.
We're about 25 seconds in, Marisa. And I won't be looking at the poll responses by myself next time. I was so intrigued by the responses, I forgot to press share. There we go. We're ending the poll now.
Okay.
And I'm pressing share.
There we go. Woohoo! We're over 80% have a Learning Portal account. By the end of our session today, we'll throw some instructions in the chat for if you don't have one, how you can get one, because we want to make sure everybody has access to our latest resources there. Thanks so much, Gina. So as we kind of move into our time together today, we really are, as we've said many times, in a school year unlike any other. And in the webinar, what we're going to do today is really go back and revisit the assumptions that we've made as we've written this guidance. We're going to hear from Jen and Liz, who really have been bringing this guidance to life in their districts. They'll be sharing their thinking with you. We're going to share with you just some highlights from the remote learning guidance documents, in particular the middle and end of the year pieces that we've done there, and then the essential aspects of how you can find those on the portal. So that's how we'll spend our time together today. And I know that many of you know who we are, the fabulous Gina Funito, who started us off. I'm Marisa Ramirez-Stuckey. Both of us are lucky to work for the Center for the Collaborative Classroom. And then we have Jen McMahon from Livonia, who is joining us again, as well as Liz, who is here from Newark. And I don't know how many of you joined us for our beginning of the year webinar, but this is the same crowd who kicked us off as we began the year. So we're really thrilled that Jen and Liz decided to come back and continue to share what's worked and maybe what hasn't worked for them as they've moved through the year. So as we said, we made some assumptions, and we had to, all of us have, as we've kind of begun our work this year and as we've continued throughout the year. And some of these assumptions are really essential to the ways in which we put this guidance together. So for example, reconnecting to schooling and the school community is essential for both teachers and students. Prioritizing that SEL work, you'll see throughout all of the guidance that we've done. So that was a pretty big assumption for us. In addition, we assumed that What happened in the 1920 school year for our kids was fragmented. And while they did learn, they may not have learned all of the skills, in particular foundational skills that we know are essential for them to move forward. We pretty much assumed that the mastery of grade level foundational skills was not achieved. And so for that, we made those priorities as well. We know that for some of our students, they had a lack of high volume reading and writing, which we know is essential to the work that moves forward. And that some of our students have increased trauma that's continued well into this school year through neglect or hunger or abuse or other things that aren't listed here, as well as just the pandemic in general. We have students who have had family members who have been ill. They themselves may have been ill, may have had deaths of family members as well. And because of that, because of all of these compounding factors, so many of our students may have needs that cause them to feel more frustration than normal. So as you kind of take a look and listen to these assumptions, what's true for you and your experience? We're all here now at the very beginning of December. So what's true for you? Add your thinking to the chat. And then what other assumptions might we need to have thought about now that aren't reflected in our original set of 6 that we started with? So I'm going to look into the chat as you guys start to kind of populate your thinking around these assumptions.
Marisa, one thing I was thinking about is folks are populating is this aspect of endurance. You know, we're coming into December 1st now, and I don't know that we definitely had digested this longevity of the decisions and the complications and the unknowns that we would encounter.
Yeah, Gina, I really appreciate that word endurance, because we are all enduring right now. Yeah. And I'm seeing in the chat this idea of fragmented learning, it's showing up. We're having to go back to possibly curriculum aspects from the previous grade level for our students this year, because we're seeing that piece. Flexibility, stress, our parents, our caregivers, our family members are as exhausted as we are as we kind of move through the ever-changing landscape. We're seeing that here in this schools transitioning in and out of hybrid learning, remote learning. In my area, they're using the word high flex, right? Where we're having students on a computer in the very classroom where a teacher's teaching live kids. There's, so many things that are happening there. So keep populating your thinking as you are taking a look through these assumptions that we're really needing to consider. And we're going to move now to really hearing from Jen and Liz, who are going to share kind of what's happened for them since we talked at the very beginning of the year. And Jen, I'm wondering if you'll start us off.
Yeah, so at the beginning of the year, we had said that we were going to kind of have these 2 pathways. So our plan was to have our digital learners, so families could choose to choose digital learning. And then we were actually going to do face-to-face with small cohorts. And in order to do that, our reading teachers, our math specialists had to become classroom teachers in order to keep our class sizes small enough. And so we kind of launched into that towards the end of the summer. This was an idea for us to be able to keep kids here 5 days a week. So that's where we still are, with occasional breaks for some digital learning based on perhaps different numbers that might come up, that kind of thing. But one of the things that we didn't really anticipate, or at least I guess I wasn't fully prepared for, was that it really was like starting all over for everybody, because our classroom teachers are now responsible for things like SIPs that they weren't doing before necessarily. And our SIP specialists, the ones who are our reading teachers, are now classroom teachers. So they're taking on making meaning and being a reader. And so I cannot say how incredibly impressed I am with our amazing educators just rising to the challenge. And so for me, one of the things that I just keep in mind is that everybody's sort of new and overwhelmed with all of this. So as much as possible, we're just trying to focus on that social emotional learning component, not just for kids, but just for our teachers as well. And I hope if they're listening that they feel that, but because they're just so truly, truly appreciated. But that's really our context right now, is that we have 5 days a week in person for some students, and then we have digital learners as well.
Thanks so much, Jen. Whew, SEL for adults, as important as for kids right now, for sure. Liz, how about you share a little bit of what's happening over in Newark?
Yeah, so similar to Jen, I spoke over the summer how we started the year with the focus on foundational skills instruction and social emotional learning. And we've learned a lot along the way. One thing that we've learned is that the remote learning guidance is not necessarily just for remote teachers. There's so many great resources in there for those who are in the hybrid or the blended or the high flex model that Marisa was talking about, but also for those who are in person. So like Jen's school, the school district that I support is also in person 5 days, but we also have that other pathway of students who are also remote. So a number of students chose the remote option, freed up some space in the classroom to have that 5-day in-person instruction. However, people needed to be really strategic about that in-person instruction with the social distancing limitations. And so there's a lot of virtual instruction happening even within the brick and mortar building. So the remote learning guidance has been really essential for thinking outside the box and setting up those situations. I do know, I have learned that technology and virtual teaching takes longer than in-person teaching. Everything is just a little bit more complicated and just requires like just a little bit more of like a workaround or an outside of the box type of thinking. But it really speaks to the flexibility that teachers have had and to thinking about priorities. So teachers have had to like change up schedules based on like how things are going or different modifications. So in the beginning, they may have had this amount of time allotted for this particular piece of their day, and they've had to change that up. And so that constant parent communication with those at-home learners has been really essential. So having those platforms, and a positive of that is that teachers are getting to know family members that much better, right? So we're making those home connections. Teachers know everyone in the family now. They have daily conversations with parents. So that's been a really nice plus as it relates to the remote instruction. But overall, teachers are really supporting each other. The learning portal has become a teacher's best friend. And I know, as many of you know, there have been resources added on a really consistent basis to support teachers. And so I know that many teachers really, really appreciate all of the supports that have been added as time has gone on and as needs have been expressed. I know most recently, managing the book checkout system has been really helpful in having that added guidance to the remote learning guidance, specifically with that middle of the year piece. And just trying to navigate that new world and thinking about, priorities and essential books to address within each set has been really, really helpful. Some additional things that we've been thinking about is that transition. So we focused the beginning of the year on that foundational skills instruction. So administering the SIPS placement assessment to everyone, determining placement. And then where do we go from here? At what point do we transition back into our tier 1 instruction, which is being a reader? And so we've been looking at the RTI MTSS guidance document for some recommendations around that. And so that's kind of something that we're starting to grapple with. And also, we're kind of at this point in the year where families made a 20-week commitment to either remote or in-person instruction. So we're at that transition point where families are starting to think about either coming back to in-person, or maybe there are some in-person families who are thinking of switching to remote learning. So there's a lot of transitions that are coming up. So I expect that we may even need to go back and revisit some of that beginning of the year guidance as maybe class list change, or as some of those other pieces kind of come to fruition. So those are some of the things that, we've been thinking about and working through and grappling with.
Thank you, Jen and Liz. We're going to continue our journey and now really moving into talking about the middle and the end of the year. And before we do that, we just want to do one more poll just to see if you've used our resources, remote learning guidance resources. And so I've opened the poll, and just let us know. Have you used them? No, or I didn't even know that they existed, which is a great thing that you're part of our webinar today. So you'll get a chance to really experience those as well. It's really hard to wait 30 seconds, Marisa.
It really seems like it's a long time, doesn't it?
It does. Well, there we go. There's our 30 seconds, friends. I will end the poll and I will share the results. So we have a good portion of you who have known about those resources. Some of you have known about them but haven't used them yet. And a few of you haven't even gotten a chance to know that they exist yet. So we'll get a chance to delve into that today. My colleagues will share a link in the chat that can give you direct access to those guidance documents. They're available on the learning portal as well as on our website. So the link we'll be using today for ease of use during this webinar is the website link today. And before we jump into talking about the middle and end of the year guidance, we want to just reacclimate ourselves to some of the things that we talked about at the beginning of the year webinar. What did we consider as we were writing this remote learning guidance? The first thing that we considered is the integrity of the lessons as well as the time of year. You might have remembered if you joined us in July that we spoke about the beginning of the year, establishing the community, establishing the routines, that was so important to the integrity of the school year that we didn't actually make many adjustments to the lessons. But as we went into the middle and end of the year guidance, we did that, continue to consider reduced instructional time as well as essential learning and what adjustments might we make. We also wanted to provide in each of the guidance documents a go bag guidance or support. What do we need at home? What do I as the teacher, what do my students need so we can really do this work? And so you'll see that prevalent in each of the guidance documents that we have. As well as we wanted to make that connection to at-home activities beyond the synchronous learning. How are the students applying their work? How are they gaining independence? And what does that really look like? And Jen, I know you've been thinking a lot about that. Might you continue the conversation about at-home activities?
Yes, I think that, when we think about remote learning, we kind of automatically are moving and thinking about digital learning. But the truth is, a lot of our feedback from families is that they are looking for opportunities for students to be able to kind of continue their learning, but offline. Especially with our younger students, we want to try to kind of minimize that screen time. So in those at-home activities, there are a lot of games and other kind of movement-based activities that I think I've been sharing with families just when they ask me about this kind of thing, because they really do help students kind of reinforce what they're doing, but also kind of in a game-like format. And then as well as just reminding them that we want students to be reading as much as possible. We want them to be writing and having great conversations about books, family read alouds. All of those kinds of things are really, really important and have just sort of, I think, kind of come to the forefront more recently, just as families are really seeking ways to really engage with their children, but not necessarily online. And so that those at-home activities, I think, are just a really great resource.
Thank you, Jen. And later when we go to the learning portal, we'll get a chance to note that not only are these at-home activities built into the remote learning guidance documents, there's also a section in the remote learning guidance chicklet that's specifically for families. So they have specific resources there that you can share with the families that you're teaching and supporting their students. So let's move on to the most complex part of remote learning, friends, which is copyright. We have learned so much about the implications of remote learning and copyright. And one of the most important things that we've learned is the copyright holder for the text is the only one that can provide guidance on how to use that text remotely. As many of you know, we are not the copyright holder, particularly of our Making Meaning and Being a Writer books. And so it's really important to use the guidance document to help navigate that. There's a copyright section in every remote learning guidance document, as well as a note about the read aloud section. And the note about the read aloud section and it gives you guidance on how to navigate the read alouds, as well as that link. And you see that highlighted there for you. There's a link that gives you access to the remote, the copyright holders' websites so that you can see the remote learning guidance that they have to offer. Just pausing for us to digest that. I think that's one of the most common questions we get. It's the most complicated question we get. And I know it's not always the answer we want to hear, but this is the answer that's in alignment with the copyright holders agreements, as well as within alignment of what we're allowed to offer for utilizing the texts that are within our programs. So with that, Marisa, let's continue that journey and talk more about being a writer and making meaning.
Yes, let's talk about it. So as we think about the guidance that we put forward into the middle and end of the year, one of the biggest things that we did, and in particular, this is true in being a writer, is made some considerations for unit order. And so you'll notice as you're taking a look through that guidance that we may have reordered some units, in particular in 3rd through 6th grade, to prioritize some high utility units over some others. And again, that really relates to that next box, which is reduced instructional time. So we know this is a reality of what we're all dealing with right now. As I think it was Liz who said, everything takes longer remotely than you thought it was going to. We're trying to really just be honest and frank about what's possible. So you'll notice that in some of the guidance, we'll articulate really clearly, this is a 3-week unit. All weeks are essential. Please teach this unit in its entirety. You'll also notice that in some units, it will say something like, if reduced instructional time is a consideration, you might consider removing week 4 from this unit, and we give the rationale for why. I have to be really honest, writing those sentences was really hard because we know that everything that is built into making meaning and being a writer is essential for kids to have. But we also have to be fully aware of what we're all dealing with right now. And so we've made some hard decisions and tried to help guide you in thinking about those reductions for instructional time if you need them. And of course, you guys know how to find us. So if you have questions as to our rationale or our whys, please reach out. We're happy to kind of share our thinking and see if that helps you as you're moving forward. In addition to that, we've made a lot of guidelines and help and support for asynchronous or independent work. Thank you for bringing that up, Jen. I just think it's really important. We highlighted some of the extensions that oftentimes teachers feel like they might not have time for, that we felt like would work really well as independent or asynchronous work there. You'll also notice that we modified or alerted you to some things that might need to be modified if you're in a completely remote setting. So for example, if a unit is teaching think, pair, share, we're going to alert you to, hey, that's going to need to be modified if you're working in a completely remote setting. And then in addition to that, we did provide some considerations for instructional priorities. So you'll notice as we moved through the units that happen in the middle and in the end of the year, we highlighted the essential learning for you so that if you're having to make some of those hard decisions, you'll see what the most important priorities are within that unit so that you can make some adjustments as needed. So hope that's helpful. Please continue to reach out to us for some support as you're thinking through those things.
Liz, might you reference what you were sharing about war?
It's my own abbreviation for writing about reading. My apologies.
Gina, I wanted to share one more thing that I just thought of. You'll notice in particular in Making Meaning, there have been some suggestions that on day 1 of weeks where we know we're having a longer read aloud, that we're suggesting that be recorded for students so that when it's a discussion, you're able to really engage in that if you're able to for synchronous learning through that remote. So I just want to reiterate again, the copyright holder is the one who can tell you if you're allowed to record that or not. We're suggesting if the copyright holder gives you that permission, and again, many publishers have relaxed their permission. So my inclination is that they're going to say yes, and you'll see it right there on their website if you go to it. But we can't give you that permission to do it, even if we're making the suggestion that you do so.
Thank you, Marisa.
Sure.
Let's continue by talking about being a reader. And first, I want to talk about prioritizing shared reading. For our youngest readers in kindergarten and first grade, shared reading is such an essential part of the learning to love, engage in, and experience reading, particularly in a communal way. And I know, Liz, this has been important for your work as well. Might you add more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love shared reading. As a former reading recovery teacher, the early grades are near and dear to my heart. I find it to be just such a powerful component of the whole reading process for our emergent readers. And so as we're thinking about priorities, we've really tried to prioritize shared reading as live virtual instruction. So not to be necessarily recorded and sent out. We find that those having access to the big books on the learning portal is so helpful to foster that sense of engagement. And I will share that they're even being used during in-person instruction, because now that desks have to be 6 feet apart, spread across the room, some schools don't necessarily have the ability to have students gather in front and see and corely read a big book. So having access to the large digital version of the shared reading text that they can display like on a smartboard or project has been just really essential for fostering that engagement and helping our students acquire all those beginning literacy skills. So definitely something to consider, you know, even if it's not a remote situation, checking out those big books in the digital version. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share about shared reading.
Thank you, Liz. We also want to prioritize small group reading. We particularly want to prioritize the acquisition of the foundational skills that's happening in sets 1 through 5. In sets 1 through 5, we're developing foundational skills so that students are able to apply that to text. And we want to be really strategic about that, as well as leverage the learning letter names and the handwriting videos that we have available for you on the learning portal. And before we get a chance to see those, see where those are located, Liz is going to share more about how she's leveraged those videos.
Yeah, so it's such a gift to have access to those, even if they're not necessarily being used as that like core instruction, which they certainly could be. However, if you're prioritizing small group instruction live, you may consider using the recorded lessons of the small group to push out if a student is absent, for example, or with the learning letter names videos. If you have a student who may need additional supplemental instruction, or maybe they were absent for their learning letter names video, that's something that they could, just grab that link and engage in during their independent work time. So a couple different ways that you can keep kids moving on along that path and maybe reinforce along the way as well.
I've also heard there's been some binge watching of the learning letter name videos by some students who really enjoy, particularly when they get to do those hand exercises as well. I'm going to go ahead and take us into the learning portal, and I am in my learning portal account. And while I'm in my learning portal account, I want to take you into some of the resources that we just spoke about. So I'm going to the Professional Learning Implementation tab. In the Professional Learning Implementation tab, I'm going to the Remote Learning Guidance Chicklet. In the Remote Learning Guidance Chicklet, you'll notice that the programs are listed at the top, as well as the family resources that we mentioned earlier when Jen was speaking about those at-home activities. I'm going to stay in being a reader, though. The first thing I just want to note is that at the top of every program, you'll see is the Remote Learning Guidance document that we've been mentioning today, as well as you'll see that you can navigate the left-hand side. So I'm going to go to handwriting, and you can see here that the kindergarten and first grade handwriting videos are here for you. The final handwriting videos for first grade were just released to us, so they'll be up on the learning portal shortly as well. Same thing with learning letter names. If you come into learning letter names, you'll see that you have those videos as well. Now, Marisa, notice that there's not a video for Kipper's A to Z or A Child's Day, right? We know that copyright agreement would not allow us to record that for you. So those videos are not available, but all the other lessons are available to you.
Well, and I might just give a little hint to those of you who have joined our Facebook community. If you haven't, our friends there have found some recordings on YouTube of some of these these read alouds. So you might be able to leverage those. So join our Facebook community so you can get all that insider info.
Yes. And in addition to that, Liz mentioned the small group reading sets. You'll notice that if you come in and you scroll down, that we have videos for those as well. And again, we want to make sure we're prioritizing mastery. So you notice that we're not prioritizing using these as videos, but they're excellent resources for when somebody is absent, when somebody might need extra support. I also recently saw on Twitter where a class was practicing getting ready to transition to remote learning using these videos in the classroom so that the kids got used to doing that kind of work. And again, we have a few videos still to come for set 5, and those will be finished up by January. And so you'll get a chance to experience those as well. You might be noting that you're not as fluent as I am in the learning portal, and that's okay. One of the handouts that we're going to give you as a follow-up with the archive to this webinar is we're going to provide you with directions to all the things that we showed you today within the webinar, so you don't have to remember and you don't have to keep rewinding or fast forwarding the webinar to figure that out as well. So as we think about this journey into being a reader, we also want to acknowledge that small group reading is unique and different. Small group reading in sets 1 through 5, as well as 7 through 12. One of the things that we did within the guidance document was not only provide beginning, middle, and end of the year guidance for many of the aspects of being a reader, we also provided very unique guidance for sets 1 through 5, as well as 7 through 12. For sets 1 through 5, we're featuring the work around the instructional routines. We're featuring the work around making sure the students are able to apply that to reading, as well as really being engaged in the instruction that allows them to attain those foundational skills. So let's take a look at a few resources on the learning portal. So I'm staying right where I was, right here, except for the fact that I'm going to go back to the remote learning guidance. I'm going to open the remote learning guidance document just so you can see. The nice thing about the guidance document is that these are all links. So you see beginning, middle, and end of the year, but then you see sets 1 through 5 and 6 through 12. So if I go to 1 through 5, I can see that I have all the guidance that I need in order to help me really orchestrate teaching those lessons. In addition to that, is I wanted to also show you two other things on the learning portal. So I wanted to actually go back to the apps tab. I'm going back to the apps tab because you might think about, well, how are my students going to get access to these books? One of the ways that they can get access to the sets 1 through 5 books is by using the book room chiclet. So I'm in the apps tab, I'm in the book room chiclet, and I'm looking for book room small group reading, and I'm going to click that. And one of the really nice things is I have access to each of the texts in sets 1 through 5. So I'm going to go to set 3. I'm going to go to buzz, hum, tap, whap, whiz, ding, ding-a-ling, which is rolls right off your tongue. And I'm going to click that book right there. And you notice something in the URL. Notice that it starts with public. Public means you can share that with anybody, even if they don't have a learning portal account. So you can share this link for the book for your students who are in sets 1 through 5, so they can have access to those books as well. That's one resource I wanted to show you. Another resource I want to show you is about the routines. Some of the routines in small group reading are not as obvious to us as we're thinking about mastering the foundational skills. So we have a new resource available to you around using the instructional cues, using the guidance offered for small group reading. So I'm going to go to resources. I'm going to click small group reading set 5. You can click 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. But it's the same pathway. I'm going to click resources, and then I'm going to scroll down, and you'll notice at the very bottom is our newest resource, which provides you articulated guidance to engaging in each of the parts of the lessons within small group reading. And so this is a really nice way to support you within your work, but also make it more refined and make it more accessible for your students as they're engaging in the small group instruction. Now, Marisa, I'm going to take us back into our PowerPoint because we also know that we provided some additional information about set 7 through 12 because we had to consider essential books. Can you share us more about that?
I sure can. So I would love to be able to say it's just as easy as sharing the link as Gina just shared with sets 1 through 5. But as you guys know, we wrote the books to sets 1 through 5. We own all of those rights and we can share them really freely. And when we move into set 7 through 12 and the more sophisticated texts that kids are engaging with at that time, we know that those are trade books. And again, just like we've said this whole webinar, we don't own the rights to those. So one of the things that we worked really hard on pretty much as soon as this pandemic hit and we realized we're all going to be in this for a while is securing some rights to some of those books that happen in set 7 through 12 so that we could provide them in an online format. we knew we were not going to be able to provide an electronic form of every single book that happens in set 7 through 12. And so we really worked hard to identify the essential texts out of each set. And I again, as I've shared earlier, these were some really hard decisions because we know that all of the texts that were chosen have a real purpose. But I'll just give you a quick example. In set 7, for example, there are actually 3 chapter books that come up in set 7 that are fiction. And so we prioritized 2 of those, the ones who really focused on sequencing and retelling and fluency, as we thought about the kinds of kids and their particular pieces that happen in set 7. And we did not secure the rights to the book that worked on text to self connections, for example. So we really thought about the kinds of behaviors of the kids that are engaging in each set, what we wanted to prioritize, including fiction and nonfiction within each one of those. And just as a quick aside, we have 8 out of 12 books in set 7. We have 7 out of 10 books in set 8. So we're talking about really big numbers of the books that are actually there for you, and all of the books in set 11 and all of the books in set 12. So there's a significant amount of text. But when we use the word essential, it's because we made some decisions about what we knew we were going to be able to provide as well. So I know that that's a little tricky when you see the word essential, but the majority of the texts are available for you as you're thinking about teaching set 7 through 12.
Marisa, I'm going to just show us, I'm going to just close some of these tabs right up so I can show us the next part, but I'm going to go back to professional learning implementation. I'm going to go back to the remote learning guidance, and I'm going to go back to the remote learning guidance for being a reader. And then I'm going to just click on the handy dandy table of contents and go right to set 7 through 12. And if I scroll down, you'll see that that list is there for you. And those that are in italics, or are italicized, I should say, are the story or the poems or articles that were already part of your set as well.
Yes, and as we've talked all along, the publishers are the ones who are giving us those agreements. And so as Gina talks about how we share these texts, we know that we cannot just share them. They don't have a public URL, as you'll see there, in the same ways that we can with sets 1 through 5. We have a unique URL for each student. Each student is allowed to access it at 3 points. And so I know it's tricky and I know it's confusing, and we've done a lot of work, but know that we're working really hard to make these accessible to you and your students. It's just not as open as the ones that we own.
Megan, we're going to also provide you guidance in the follow-up email of the pathway, but I'll just do this pathway one more time because it is the remote learning guidance documents, and I think that's so essential. When you sign into your learning portal, it'll most likely start with the apps tab, is what's forward facing for you. You're going to want to go to the professional learning implementation tab. You're going to want to click remote learning guidance. I didn't click it. There we go. And then we're going to want to click whatever program you're trying to navigate. Today, right now, we've been focusing on being a reader. So I'll stay right here, and I'm going to stay in remote learning, and I have the remote learning guidance document right there for us. And so that pathway is going to be consistent for all the programs that you're engaging in. But Marisa, I thought I'd just take one moment and show how to check out a book. And so I am going to back to the apps tab. I'm going to ClassView Pro. Now I have a variety of classes because I work for Collaborative Classroom across grades. So I don't just have a second grade or a first grade class that has set 7 through 12, but I know that I have a student who I can assign a book to for purposes of today. So it's a little different when I do it because I have to go through my whole list of students, but you guys obviously have your own students in there. So I'm in ClassView Pro. I'm going to click Students. I'm then going to have to type in my student's name, Libby, because she just doesn't come up right away. Because again, like I shared, I have a whole slew of kids in my list here. So I'm looking for Libby. And once I have Libby, I'm going to click on her. Now notice when I click on Libby, at the very far right is 3 tabs: student work, sharing, and books. I'm going to go to books, and you notice that Libby is placed into set 7. So I have those books right here available for her. I've already actually added Jellyfish for her. And if you notice, I have a link here and I can click to copy that link. And then I can share that link with Libby so that she can have access to the book. Now, Marisa, this is really different. Like you said, with sets 1 through 5, we have a public access link that can go to any student or to a group of students. There's no criteria because we own those books. But here, actually, we do have criteria because of the copyright holder, and it's one link per student. So we have to think about this a bit differently when we're navigating assigning our books to our students.
Exactly. And every student gets their own link, and that's the way in which we'll be able to track and provide our publishers with the information on how many times these books have been accessed. And each student has the ability to kind of use that link on 3 different devices. So they get some flexibility. But one of the biggest things that's been tripped up is teachers have generated that particular link and then put it somewhere where every kid has access to it. And then the next thing you know, nobody has access to it anymore. So I know it's tricky, but definitely reach out to us, and we're happy to support you with that.
Maybe one of our esteemed panelists, Jen or Liz, might want to speak to. Have you used Epic to kind of help navigate getting access to books or any other resources?
So I do know that our teachers have definitely used Epic to kind of supplement and to try to get additional resources. So somebody was asking, yes, could you supplement? Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I was just noticing Megan's question. We've actually had people share in all different ways. We've had folks use a Google Doc. We've had folks email it to students. We've had folks use their LMS systems like Canvas or Seesaw so that they can share that link as well. It's really what best is for you. So when I went to copy that link is now copied and I could share that with my student. Jen or Liz, do you use any other formats for sharing those that I listed?
The Google Doc or the shared document seems to be what works best and is most manageable for teachers.
So let's continue on to our last priority, which is SIPs. If our students are in need of that accelerative foundational skills instruction that is provided by SIPs, if they need that kind of intensive support where they're mastering those foundational skills and applying that to text, we really encourage you to prioritize SIPs. And I know, Jen, that's something you've done as well. Might you share more?
Yes, I definitely wanted to talk about this because just as Liz was sharing, we made sure that we screened all of our students with that SIPS placement assessment using that beginning of the year guidance. And we found that we did have students with pretty significant foundational skills gaps. And so we really had to make sure that we prioritized accelerating that growth so that we can kind of get them back on track this year. So prioritizing SIPs is absolutely what we've done. As I shared before, we had classroom teachers who'd never taught SIPs before, and we had reading teachers who were expert in SIPs who were now classroom teachers. And so just sort of sharing together and trying to kind of get everybody on board with this. And it's still a work in progress, to be honest. But as we have looked at our beginning of the year data and gotten students kind of moving in SIPs, the students that maybe just needed a little boost are now making rapid growth and kind of ready to move on. And students that traditionally we probably would have had in SIPs a little longer and maybe had that more intensive work with them, those students are also making that progress in SIPs. So I just think that, when we came into the school year, we knew that foundational skills and social emotional learning were going to be our #1 focus. And so I think that we have really done both of those things. And then we're kind of at this point now where we're taking a look at our data and kind of deciding what our next steps will be as far as, some students are ready to move into those into sets. Some students are still going to continue with SIPs, but just really thinking about, meeting these foundational skills needs. I think it was a really good decision because this is really where we want students to feel really comfortable, especially as we are looking at rising COVID rates and things like that, if we have to do more digital learning, I just feel a little more comfortable knowing that we've really focused on foundational skills from the beginning.
Thank you, Jen. In addition to that, when you go to the SIBS remote learning guidance document, you'll notice that it's organized a bit differently. It's organized very similarly actually to the sets 1 through 5 remote learning guidance, where we're really thinking about the routine, the integrity of the lessons, the authentic corrective feedback, the engagement of the students, not only in the foundational skills mastery, but as well as the application to text. And I know, Liz, that's something you've thought about too, of the importance of the integrity of teaching SIBS remotely.
So yeah, thanks, Gina. I think that when teachers are initially thinking about teaching SIPs remotely, they think they need to teach everything through screen share. However, I think it's really important for teachers to find their own way of work when they're thinking about balancing whether it's screen share or whether they're holding up a whiteboard or they're holding up a card or they're using maybe a background as a resource. So I would encourage teachers to think about the routine and what would lend itself best to either screen share or the handheld option. And you don't have to go one way or the other. You don't have to say, I'm all screen share, I'm all handheld. You can toggle between the two. Like, for example, I would recommend sharing your screen when your students are engaging in that choral reading in the beginning level. I think that really lends itself to that work. So just consider what would lend itself to that high involvement most efficiently. And I think just finding that balance and that way of work that you're comfortable with, because if you're comfortable with it, then it's going to be more effective instruction.
Yeah, and I also was thinking about this for sets 1 through 5 and for SIPs 2 as well, Liz, is that sometimes when you're trying to navigate watching the students, engaging with them, that when you're seeing the, when you're screen sharing, sometimes you lose some of that aspect. So I know I actually was looking down, my whiteboard's right next to me, so that there's some things I like to do with my whiteboard and be able to see the students' engagement in the learning. So thinking about what works best for you as well as the learner, as well as what our outcome is within the instruction. So I'm going to take us back into the learning portal and show us a few additional things. So I'm going back to the main page of the learning portal. I'm going to go into the professional learning implementation tab, but I'm going to go to a different chiclet. I'm going to go to a chiclet called the Teacher Learning System. In the chiclet called the Teacher Learning System, I'm going to click SIPs. And what you'll notice on the left-hand side is that there are a variety of opportunities for you to have just-in-time learning to support you. And one of those just-in-time learning is teaching SIPs remotely. And so if you click on teaching SIPs remotely, you can engage in the activity that's offered here, as well as you could watch the video. And the video is my colleague Ashley and I actually demonstrating different ways to orchestrate the routines within SIPs remotely, whether it's screen sharing, using our whiteboard, using some of the digital resources that are available to you on the learning portal as well. In addition to that, is earlier I had showed you guys the book room app. I'm going to go back to the apps tab, Marisa, because this is really exciting. Not only do I have a book room app for small group reading, I have one for SIPs as well. So if I'm teaching SIPs, I can go to book room. I can find, am I teaching beginning? Am I teaching extension? Or am I teaching plus? Let's say that I'm teaching beginning and I'm teaching up and down the hills. And when I click it, notice again, my link is public. So I can share this link with anybody outside of the learning portal as well to support them. And so you have that book room app right available to you as well. As we think about kind of culminating our time together, I just thought I'd spend one more minute acclimating us to the learning portal. But notice I know my colleague Ashley has put in the chat box, we have some tutorials, we have some guidance around the tabs and the chicklets, but we also have a quick reference guide for you just for today's webinar. Where did we go and how can you get back there from today's conversation? So the apps tab is the tab you'll always see when you come into the learning portal. This is where your ClassView Pro is. This is where your book room app is, as well as if you're teaching SIPs, this is where your wildcard presentation tool is as well. Your resources tab provides you access to, now don't get nervous, I work for Collaborative Classroom, so I have every program and every grade. You would just have the licenses to you, but these are the things that are your general resources to support your work. And then the last tab, which is the one we spent most of our time in today, is the professional learning implementation tab. The Chicklet, the remote learning guidance Chicklet, is the one we've been featuring because we're talking about our remote learning guidance. We also featured the teacher learning system, but I forgot one, Liz. Earlier, I failed to take us to the shared reading Chicklet. So the shared reading Chicklet is right here for you on the professional learning implementation tab if you're teaching kindergarten or first grade. When you click on the shared reading tab, you will have access to the shared reading text that you can display to support your instruction and to provide that instruction for the students. One of the things that you'll notice is that the text can be navigated in the toolbars at the bottom of the screen so that you can make that larger, make it more visual for the students that are accessing that text as well. And so those are some of the main features of the Learning Portal. Note that you'll continue to get more flexible with that as well as you go through utilizing the portal and getting more comfortable with the resources. Before we take any questions, I just thought we would want to remind you guys that we have 2 more upcoming webinars. One is navigating the RTI MTS document in January, as well as the other is the end of the year considerations for collaborative literacy and SIPs, which is in February. We'll be sharing links on how to register for those as well. We hope that you join us for that. And so, Marisa, I'm wondering what questions have bubbled up, or if folks want to add questions to the chat box as well, we can address some of those right now.
Yeah, I'm seeing just a couple of things. Just one thing to remember, as you're looking at Gina's Learning Portal, she has access to everything, but you will only have access to things that you have licenses for. So again, like if you don't have Being a Reader, the book room for Being a Reader is not going to show up for you in those apps tabs. So that's something to keep in mind. And Ashley has shared that tutorial document that will really help you ensure that you have the right licenses that are there to make sure that that makes sense for you. Gina, one other thing I'm just thinking about, just because you just put it up right before we were finishing, is the RTI MTSS discussion. So for many of us, as we're navigating these uncharted waters, as I'm really tired of people saying, but it's so true, as we think about students who may need some additional support, that RTI MTS document is really there to help you think about those instructional decisions that you're going to make for students who need more than core instruction right now.
Marisa, I'm noticing Lisa was asking a bit about CSE. And one of the reasons we didn't feature CSE today is that we don't necessarily have implications to the beginning, middle, or year in that document. We have some general overall implications that can support you, but that was recently updated. So you'll want to take a look, just like all of the documents, actually. We only really featured Being a Reader today for the purpose of this webinar, but each of the program documents have been updated and have been refined since we've learned more since releasing those in July.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And additionally, Gina, fix me up here, but the TLS only shows up if you have SIPs or CSC. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right. Correct. So if you don't have either of those programs, the teacher learning system won't show up in your portal. It's all connected to the licenses. That makes sense.
It's a new offering that we're trying out this year. And as we get a chance to expand it to more programs, we'll release it out to all those who have licenses for those for those programs. So more to come on that. It's been a unique year for all of us. So our priorities have shifted a bit. So our priorities have shifted to the remote learning resources and guidance. And we haven't been able to expand this TLS yet, but that's coming soon.
Well, and Megan has asked a couple of questions in the chat where we've said, hey, let's post that in the Facebook group. So again, not to keep plugging our Facebook group, but there's such a community of educators there to answer questions. And so Megan, the Google Doc for set 7 through 12, there's been a lengthy thread where people were sharing how they were doing that. So I really want to direct you there as well. And I can help tag you in that post since you're going to post in there anyway. So again, there's just so much richness there, and it's not just our thinking, the 4 of us who are here, but just educators from across the country who are sharing their thinking and their ways of work. And so we want to learn from everybody.
And just add, sorry, there is a search function as well. And so if you have a question, chances are somebody's already had that question and probably people have answered it. So the search function works beautifully for you to be able to kind of find and kind of curate what you're looking for.
Yes, yes. And Sonia, you're exactly right. So if the link at the top says public, you can share that with other folks who do not need a learning portal login. But if it's private, it will not allow you to share that outside. So that's kind of how you know if it's a private link, only those who have a learning portal login would be able to access that as well.
After the webinar today, we'll get a chance to collect all the resources, collect the archive of the webinar. And within the next few days, you'll get a follow-up email. It'll have all the links, particularly that Ashley's been sharing in the chat, as well as an archive for today, as well as a quick link to the Facebook community page.
Well, with that, we just want to say thank you so much for spending 57 minutes of your day with us when we know that you have so many things happening. We hope this was helpful for you. And again, so many places to reach out. So please do. We're all here to support each other in this crazy time, but we're grateful to you guys. Thank you very much.